Hi, it's Steve from Part Select. Today we're going to show you how to change an evaporator fan motor on your refrigerator. It's a really easy job. All you're going to need is a pair of needle nose pliers, a Phillips screwdriver, and a small flat blade screwdriver, and a 1/4 inch and a 5/16 inch nut driver. Let me show you how we do it. Now before we begin this repair, the first thing that we'll need to do is to pull the refrigerator out and disconnect the power. Simply pull the plug from the receptacle. Now our first step will be to open the freezer door, remove any items that are in the freezer, including on the ice cube tray. And then we're going to remove that holder for the ice cube trays. And to remove it, we'll need to lift it up enough, push it fully to the left to insert the 2 pins on the end of that shelf as far in as they'll go. And then we're going to bend it slightly to disengage it from a couple of T-pins on the top. Now we'll want to make sure that that's warm enough that it will bend easily. If it's frozen, you may run the risk of breaking it. So simply push it over far enough to clear those pins. And then you can lift it out and we'll set that aside. Next we're going to remove 2 Phillips screws that hold the evaporator fan cover in place. We can lift up on that fan cover and then tilt it away at the top, gently lift it off of the styrofoam block that is beneath it. We'll set that aside. Next we're going to remove 2 Phillips screws from the front of the freezer floor. These screws are slightly longer than the 2 that held the evaporator fan cover in, just so you can distinguish between them. Now we'll get hold of a corner of that floor and tilt it up on the front. We need to disengage some hooks that fasten to the back of the evaporator cover. And then slide that out, set it aside. There's the 4 hooks that hook into the back of the evaporator cover. Now we're going to remove this styrofoam block. You take caution when pulling that up out of there. It just fits into the floor of the freezer as a friction fit. We'll set that aside. We'll now remove 2 Phillips screws from the upper corners. And then 2 1/4 inch hex head screws that secure the evaporator cover to the fan motor bracket. Now you can lift that evaporator cover out of the way and set that aside. Now with the evaporator cover off, we have access to the components. So our next step will be to disconnect the fan motor, depress the 2 locking tabs on the side of the wire connector, and disengage that. And with our needle nose pliers, we're going to remove the ground wire from the end of the evaporator mounting bracket. And then we'll remove 2 Phillips screws that hold that bracket to the back wall. You need to support that motor assembly when you're taking the last screw out. And now we can take the assembly and set it on a suitable work surface and complete our repair. All right, now that we have the assembly sitting on a suitable work surface, we'll begin by removing the fan blade. So with a small flat blade screwdriver, we'll get in underneath that retaining clip and just gently pry that off And keep your finger on top of the shaft so that that little ring doesn't go flying somewhere. And set that aside. Now with a pair of needle nose, we'll go in underneath the fan blade and gently pry that off of the motor shaft. Set that aside. Now with our 5/16 nut driver, we'll remove the 2 screws that hold the front portion of that motor bracket in place. Now we can lift the front bracket off of the motor. Remove the motor from the rear bracket. While we have that off, inspect the 2 grommets, both front and rear, to determine whether they need to be replaced or not. If they're torn or ripped or deteriorated, they should be replaced at the same time. Now to install the new motor, we'll simply set the button on the back of the motor into that rear grommet. We'll slide the front bracket over top so that it sandwiches the motor in between. We'll replace those 5/16 screws, including the ground wire. Next, we'll reinstall the fan blade. Now it's probably best to install the retaining clamp on the front of that blade first. Now, it's a little snug, so start by catching it over 1/3 of that center hub on the fan blade, and then with a pair of needle nose pliers, you can just expand that enough to pop it over the rest of it. Once you've got it started on there, you can press it in place. Make sure it slides all the way down on the hub until it hits the little shoulder on the bottom. And we'll slide it onto the shaft. You should have about 1/4 of an inch of shaft protruding from that blade. So just pry it back till it fits the right spot. And now we're ready to reinstall the assembly in the refrigerator. Now to reinstall the motor assembly, we'll take one of those Phillips screws and have that ready. We'll put one of the mounting screws in place and install the other one. Make sure that when you mount that you don't pinch the wire that goes to the defrost thermostat. We'll next connect the harness to the motor. Make sure the locking tabs engage. And reinstall the ground wire to the terminal on the mounting bracket. Next, we'll take the evaporator cover, slide that into position, and we'll secure it with the 2 1/4-inch hex head screws that hold it to the motor bracket. Then we'll replace the 2 screws in the upper corners. Next, we'll reinstall the styrofoam block. And again, take caution when inserting that into the opening. Now we can put the freezer floor back in. Make sure those 4 tabs engage the evaporator cover. They tuck in behind the cover, and then the lip of the floor will be across the front. And we'll put the 2 longer Phillips screws into the front of the freezer floor. Install the fan cover. Slide that down over the styrofoam block. Lift it up enough to engage the two hooks at the top of that cover. They hook it into the evaporator cover. Slide it down into place, make sure it's engaged at the top. The two screws for the tabs fit into the freezer floor. We'll secure those with the two remaining screws. Next, we'll put the shelf in for the ice cube trays. These two pins need to go into the upper portion of that slotted hole so that it allows the shelf to go tight up against the wall. We will hook two slots in the top into the T-pins. And we can pull those two pins out and set them down to the bottom of those slotted holes. Now we're ready to load the freezer back up. Plug the refrigerator in, and our repair is complete. Told you it was an easy job. Thanks for watching, and good luck with your repair.